Good morning and welcome to NTWC Plus. It is provided great support from a lot of folks here. One of them is USAA. They've been with us for the very beginning and helping us keep the National Tropical Weather Conference going, and of course NTWC Plus and Hurricane Center podcast as well. The South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, also another great help for us to keep the conference going down in South Padre Island. We're setting up for this year, April 2nd through the 4th at South Padre Island. The weather company, Weather Boy, which really brings in students from all around the country with their new kind of a little contest to bring students in. And then, of course, our newest addition is Weather Call. And early this morning, we are already ready to go. We've got Bill Reed, we've got Ryan Truchelut, Mark Sudduth, and Hal Needham. So we're all set. Bill, I'm turning it over to you. Let's see what we've got going for today.
Okay, our first guest I'll introduce is Ryan Truchelut. He's the co-founder, president, and chief meteorologist for Weather Tiger. I suppose many of you have subscribed to his blog, weekly blog at least, and find it very informative and useful. So we're really pleased to have Ryan on board. He does a lot more than just a blog, though. He possesses the expertise in both operational and research science and uses that as a professional meteorologist in providing mission-critical information to his clients across a very broad area of enterprises. And he's also been used in the media quite a bit. And since a lot of you are in the media, maybe you have had him on there also. So, Ryan, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you for the invite, and I'm really glad to be here. I mean, and truly, from Southeast Tallahassee, I'm truly glad to be here this week. So,
yeah, we're going to dig into Helene mostly on this show. When Mark Sudduth will join in also on some of the findings from observations and whatnot. But maybe a brief overview of your background and what it is you do and look at that for those that don't know you.
Sure. Well, born and raised in Orlando, so native Floridian, come by the love of hurricanes and weather, honestly, tracking hurricanes at 50 past the hour with John Hope on the floor as I was growing up, and decided to make a career of it. I've been forecasting at least part-time professionally for almost 20 years now. Got started with the mid-2000s storms part-time, I went to Princeton for geosciences and then went to FSU for a master's and a doctoral degree with Dr. Bob Hart, the illustrious, of course. And then, as many do when they go to FSU, stayed in Tallahassee after graduated, founded Weather Tiger with my co-founder, Dr. Erica Staling, and have been at it providing hurricane intel as well as agricultural meteorology to clients from the commodities industry and the insurance industry since 2015.
Excellent. It sounds like a full plate and a fun one at that. So a week or so ago, I was happily ensconced in our summer home up in New Mexico, watching Helene from an extremely safe location, as you might imagine, and reading your blog as well as others. And it was unfortunately, the storm did what it was forecast to do. So, how did you, knowing you were under the gun for that one, how did you mix your personal aspects of dealing with the hurricane with your professional ones?
Well, it's always tough to be objective when you're forecasting a storm professionally that's also pointed more or less directly at you. It was certainly, I mean, everyone here, no news to anyone listening, I'm sure. Helene was a storm that had, quote, that look well ahead of time. I think we could all, and the weather enterprise, see this one coming a long way away and start to message that it was going to be, a very significant event. Here in North Florida, I have a lot of readership through the local USA Today papers as well as my newsletter. I was trying to get the word out, well ahead of time that this is something that we need to be prepared for. Even before it was the advisories were starting to be issued, I was trying to prep people for the potential, at least, of a major hurricane landfall in North Florida, and of course, the fact that this would be a large storm, that it would have impacts well away from the center, particularly to the east, and that the surge threat would be dangerous all up and down the Florida Gulf Coast. With that said, I didn't know up until the very, very end. The uncertainty was such that I'm in Southeast Tallahassee. Eventually, we passed about 30 miles away from the center of Helene as it went through western Taylor County. But I didn't know right up until the end if I was going to get the core of the storm, get the eye wall of the storm, and what the damage would be like. So it was a huge challenge to juggle, not only keeping clients and the local community apprised of the risks and to take my responsibility to do that very seriously, but to get myself personally prepared. Unfortunately, my wife broke a bone in her wrist in a bike accident the week before and required surgery on the Tuesday before the storm. So juggling that, I had a sick daughter, so this was just a perfect storm here in Tallahassee. To try to manage all of those issues at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. Usually prepping your house is at least a two-person job. And do you put up shutters on your house for the storm, or did you decide you didn't need to this time?
I didn't put up shutters. I fortunately am in a house that does not have overhanging trees here in Tallahassee. And I was advising people, if you are in Tallahassee and you have a house that has longleaf pines that are 50 or 70 years old or 100-year-old live oaks, evacuating is probably a good choice. And I think people in Tallahassee generally heeded that. Town really cleared out. I think, maybe half of people, if they had somewhere safe to go, did leave. So I personally didn't put shutters up. I think that I would have been okay. But at the same point, I took all my computers down from my home office, which is over a freestanding garage, and relocated to my daughter's bedroom to ride the storm out and set up a little temporary command center there.
Okay. And I gather you were able to maintain communications throughout the storm, or did you lose it eventually?
Did not lose power, did not lose communications. Power flickered a few times. I am on the same grid as the Florida Department of Emergency Management command center here. It's about a half mile from my house. So buried lines, and hopefully something that would be, prioritized and be a bit more resilient. So it worked out. I wasn't thinking necessarily that I'd be able to go the distance, that the bits and bytes and electrons would stop flowing at some point. But I signed off at around 1 a.m. With the center of the storm going into South Georgia and all the extreme wind warnings being canceled.
Wow. Yeah. My lesson learned on Beryl is that it completely disabled the cell system. We lost all the power, and the backup power on the cell towers could only support about a third to a half the traffic that the full blown one would do, and it immediately was overwhelmed because everyone's trying to contact relatives and friends, see how they are. So it took about 4 days for it to really come back. And I'm amazed you didn't lose power with all the trees around there.
Yeah, me too. I mean, Tallahassee's grid was about 80% down at peak. Locally here in North Florida, we have had so many significant wind events since 2016, including a very significant impact from tornadoes in May, two EF2 tornadoes merging over the center of Tallahassee. We have taken a lot of wind damage. So speculatively, the fact that we got anywhere from probably 65 to 80 mile an hour gusts here across Leon County, strongest in the eastern parts of it, that did go under the extreme wind warnings. We may just be a little bit saturated in terms of what kind of wind damage can happen to trees at those thresholds, because we've seen them so frequently in the past decade.
Yeah, the weaker ones have probably been taken care of. It's a good sign. I won't let anyone put a tree within falling distance of my house. Surveyed too many of them to realize that that's not you love shade, but it creates a hazard. As far as your clients, how did the communication go? How do you do with that in a big storm like this? Do you have a methodology you use to keep them informed, or is it pretty much all electronic and digital and work like a well-oiled machine?
Well, we've been through this so many times in North Florida over the past decade, really, that I do have a workflow that it's pretty dialed in at this point about what products I'm issuing to my clients at what point during the storm. When do I pivot from kind of a broader perspective on thematics of the storm as a whole to starting to talk about impacts and then getting down into regional impacts. So a couple days out, I'm pivoting to really only be discussing impacts and kind of going step by step through. I like to use the hurricane threats and impacts products from the National Weather Service as a starting point. The graphics are very nice, and I think that it's something that the clients and even the broader community can really understand those risk levels. And they were useful in this storm. They've been useful in others as well. So a couple days out, by Tuesday, I was really starting to talk all about impacts. And of course, with this being such a large area of impacts, I'd say just the products that we were putting out were required to be longer to discuss the threat. I do have a bit of a Florida focus because that is where most of my clientele is located. But we cover the Gulf Coast, we cover the Southeast. So I was trying to give my clients a heads up on the inland impacts that were coming from this as well, just with the idea that they were going to be so extensive so far inland.
Yeah, the area that I've always followed is my kind of pet part of the storms is inland flooding. So I was spending the whole time, the people I know in North Carolina mostly, that I was saying, and they all live on high ground, so they're all okay. But I said, you can't handle this kind of rain on top of what you've got 200% of normal soil saturation before the storm ever gets there. So you're going to have a lot of land loss and trees coming down on the mud, and it was bad. Were you at all surprised by the magnitude of the storm surge all the way down in South Florida?
I mean, I'm not really surprised by that the Gulf Coast, that the entire Gulf Coast saw significant impacts with the 350-mile, 34 knots sustained wind radii. I mean, I thought it was all well modeled and well communicated by the Ntwc in advance of the storm that we were going to see those risks and going to see them significantly outside of maybe not only of course outside of the cone. Trying to communicate to my clients and to the broader community, not an impacts cone. We're going to see significant surge in wind way outside of it. But I thought that was all well forecast ahead of time, and the products that I had at my disposal to take from official sources and then disseminate and explain and communicate and contextualize, I thought did very nicely. I mean, of course, they're still out doing the storm surveys now to figure out exactly what the surge was and where, but unfortunately, it does look like those extreme 15 to 20 foot values across eastern Appalachia Bay did verify.
Oh wow, yeah, I've been telling people that are asking me when am I going to get surge data to them. I said it might be a month. As widespread as it was, there's only a certain number of people they can assign to doing that kind of work. So to get get it QC'd afterwards and all, we said, wait a month and then call me. It's not going to, I don't want to give you bad info on that, but it's the same old story though. All I saw in the media from afar was on national media because I was in New Mexico, of course, and online was people were surprised that the storm surge hit without warning. And I said, wait a minute. It was just like you said, it was the reason why it was being forecast and what it was going to be was telegraphed from the start on that.
There certainly was no lack of warning. I mean, we were under storm surge and hurricane warnings on Tuesday afternoon, all along the Florida Gulf Coast. So, when in one of these situations, especially with everything else I was dealing with, I was really keeping a tight focus on, staying on top of the storm and not really looking too far out into what else was going on in society and how the information was being interpreted. I was just trying to do as good a job as I possibly could about highlighting the threats as I saw them and amplifying that good information coming out of Ntwc and other official sources.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's always a challenge of communicating those risks. People, even in this day and age, the general public thinks of hurricanes as wind events, when wind is responsible for fewer than 10% of hurricane casualties. You can hide from wind, but you got to run from water, and not only surge, but inland rain sadly is an equal or even greater threat in some cases.
Yeah, it probably has something to do with it's never happened there in their lifetime, therefore it's outside their realm of reality. Kind of like the Fukushima thing in Japan. They were touted as being the best prepared country in the world. They prepare for the worst that they know of, not the worst
Right.
that can happen. And I think some of that goes on. The one exception I saw in Florida was the folks in the Big Bend, especially the part that got nailed by Idalia last year, and again Debbie this year. They seem very aware of what they were up against when they were interviewed beforehand. But they were still some reluctant to leave. But that's not the problem of the warning. That's the problem of personalities, of your risk aversion and whatnot.
Sure. I mean, and ahead of this storm, I did have that reference point of Idalia to communicate to Big Bend, Eastern Appalachia Bay, how bad this is going to be. I was able to communicate, okay, you've just been through Idalia. That was a significantly smaller storm. The scope of the wind radii much less. The sustained winds at landfall were less too. Thankfully, that eyewall replacement cycle helped with Idalia knock the sustained winds down before it came inland. But people could have that reference point of, okay, it was this bad, and I'm looking at something that's going to be significantly worse. I was trying to communicate to the general public that this is not a storm that we have a reference point in living memory for. Appalachia Bay does not have a deep history of major hurricane landfalls. You can go back to 1896, major hurricane struck Cedar Key, but then there's nothing in the 20th century, and it's not until Idalia in 2023 and now Helene in 2024. We've gotten plenty of category 1s and 2s historically, and we just haven't had those 3s and 4s that we've had recently. So I was saying we probably haven't seen something like this in the Big Bend since the 1840s. 1840s seemed very bad, but of course it's before the start of HERDAT, so we don't have a too fine a point to put on it. They seem to have quite a spate between 1841 and 1846 up here, but no one here was alive in the antebellum times, so you're not going to have a good reference point for this. Idalia, but worse, is the message I was trying to communicate.
Alex and I are close to being back that far, but not totally.
Close enough.
Okay, Hal, I've been hogging the talk here. What you got?
Oh, I got a bunch of questions for Ryan. Before I continue, Bill, what you said that a lot of people dismissing this, we haven't seen it in our lifetime. I was in the Tampa St. Pete area before, during, and after. There's nothing, most of the people I met just completely dismissed this. I've been here since 1972. I've never flooded. And the next day they're just standing out in the street in disbelief. And like you guys said, that it was just so well forecast. It was just surprising to me that so many people dismissed it. Ryan, really interested to ask you some questions about, you said about wind forecasting and about these different products available. Will you focus more on communicating watches and warnings from the NHC and the National Weather Service, or more focus on like the probabilistic wind products, or some combination of both?
I mean, mainly what I was focused on, because I'm based in Tallahassee, and of course I have a lot of readership here in town and locally in the capital region. Initially I was communicating watches and warnings, but of course we hit hurricane warning here on Tuesday. So, people knew we were in a threat region for potentially receiving hurricane force gusts. Once, of course, you get up above 100 plus mile per hour gusts, you get into that higher potential for that structural damage, the kind of stuff that, of course, places further west of here, like Mariana, even inland, saw during Hurricane Michael. And then, of course, that kind of structural damage that in this case, we saw in towns like Madison or Valdosta, and that was kind of one of my focuses here was, what's our risk for those structurally damaging winds? And of course, we were right on the knife edge in Tallahassee with the NHC track a bit to our west on Tuesday and Wednesday. That was shaping up to, put us in the stronger part of the storm on the eastern eye wall, or at least the northern eye wall. So yeah, I was focused on using the kind of the impacts-based risk products from hurricane threats and impacts were kind of my touch point. And I didn't want to get down to too fine a level with the forecast, simply because there's intercore dynamics involved. There's slight track shifts. In the end, Tallahassee was wobble distance from the northwestern eye wall. So I was using those products to say this is the area that's highlighted to be at the highest risk of those potentially structurally damaging winds. The storm will have a fast forward speed on impact. So those winds will be able to be carried further inland and across North Florida and South Central and Southwest Georgia. So, that's kind of the starting point that I was trying to communicate. And I didn't want people to focus too much on an exact scenario or an exact potential track, simply because the storm was so large, and I expected the core to be 60 to 80 miles wide, biased east, of course, that, I want people to understand that's going to be a large area that's impacted by those severe winds.
Ryan, a lot of times when we think of evacuation, we think of getting people off the coast from like smaller beach communities and sending them inland more to big cities. In your case, with forecasting inland wind, Tallahassee is the biggest city around. I mean, how do you communicate evacuation strategies? Like, where do people go from Tallahassee? And were you encouraging people, for example, to go to the west? I mean, first of all, where do we send that many people when it's much smaller and rural around Tallahassee? And then secondly, were there directional encouragement from you or other forecasters on where people should go?
Right. I mean, my strategy for encouraging evacuations was twofold. For one, I wanted to prioritize the surge evacuations message, given the severity of the surge. And with that communication, I was trying to encourage people, you don't need to drive a long way to mitigate your risk. Just go inland, go from a place that's 6 feet above sea level to 30. And, you may still have a bad times in terms of sensible weather and impacts, but you'll be out of harm's way in terms of putting your life in danger. Obviously it is more complex with the wind risks because it's a broader area. You can't send people a few miles away. I was telling people to go west, and I was trying to keep my advice as simple as possible. I advise people to drive west until you're out of the tropical storm warning area. You don't need to drive farther than that. So in this case, I was advising people to go to Destin or Pensacola or Mobile, some of the mid-sized cities that do have capacity in terms of hotels and lodging and accommodations. And I wasn't expecting any kind of severe impacts that direction. So, drive down 10 for a couple hours and get out of the warnings. And, you don't need to drive further than that, but don't drive north. It was the message I was trying to convey here. I actually have a vacation home in Maggie Valley, North Carolina, and sort of my default plan for me facing a major hurricane risk, I figured if I ever have to get out of town, I would just, I have this other place to go. But in this case, that very quickly became, not only was moving in this case was not realistic because my wife was recovering from surgery, so we were kind of fixed in place, but driving north into the mountains obviously was going to be a terrible idea. So I still haven't heard the fate of that property yet, and hoping for good news this week. But west was my communication.
Ryan, the psychology of near misses is really interesting. On one hand, people could say, my goodness, we were lucky. I need to really get a better roof, or I need to take that big tree down from my house. And then other people just say, well, they always miss, and just don't take it to heart. What's your vibe in your neighborhood, in your community? Do you think people realize how lucky they were? Do you think people may take action with better preparing their property and themselves moving forward, realizing how close this was?
I do. Honestly, the sense out of Tallahassee is relief and gratitude, and mixed with exhaustion and confusion that this keeps happening over and over again. The temperature that I take of it is, what kind of feedback am I getting for, my stuff goes out through the newspapers as well across Florida in an event like this. And the feedback that I've gotten from people has been overwhelmingly positive. I haven't heard one single person say, you pulled the fire alarm without cause. And I said in my forecast earlier in the week, I would so much rather you prepare and react to this storm and be mad at me later if this is inaccurate. I would love to be wrong with this storm. I see this as this is a major risk to North Florida and Tallahassee. If I'm wrong about it, be mad at me later, but take this storm seriously and prepare. And honestly, I feel like there is that sense of, there is an appreciation of that here. I don't think anybody feels like we were in the range where, the forecast did a bad job, they were too, aggressive. I think everyone understands that there's an element of kind of irreducible randomness and uncertainty to hurricane forecasting, and we were well within the bounds of separating, disaster from generally, being okay here in Tallahassee.
Yeah,
Bill, I think you've shared those perspectives before.
Yeah, it sounds like I didn't train Ryan, I guarantee you, but that sounds like a young Bill Reed approach to the problem. Is very good. My thing I always add is the time it takes you to prepare and evacuate, especially the Houston area where there's 8 million people to get around. You can't make that decision when you have it down to a certainty. Depending on your risk, sometimes it's very uncertain. And for every 4 times you evacuate, 3 of them nothing happens. 1 of them your house gets wiped out. I can't tell you which one it'll be. That's kind of how I produce the probabilistic aspect. You know something, Hal? I blew it on our schedule there. You were supposed to introduce our other guests. So Mark, please accept my apologies for being an idiot.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun with Mark this morning, I'm sure. Alex, before we do that, any questions from online, any messages from the sponsors, anything you want to touch on before we get to Mark?
Yeah, let's take a look at what we have online real quick. I noticed we've got a few comments coming in, and let's see, we've got one from Casper Gregory. He says he never lost power. They live directly across the street from Apalachicola National Forest in southwest Leon County. They normally lose power during strong thunderstorms, but everything turned out well. James Grime, my area of South Carolina, didn't see much as far as severity, thankfully, very much. Casper also saying hotels were all booked up through the western panhandle. They found lodging in Fort Walton Beach. So, there's a few comments there. Let's talk a little bit about our sponsors. Let them know that we're thankful for them. USAA, who's been with us since the very beginning to keep this program going, and the National Tropical Weather Conference, also South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau. They've been with us and have been a big supporter of the conference and, of course, this program as well. The Weather Company, the Weather Boy, and Weather Call. Hal, back to you for GeoTrack.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex, and thanks to all our sponsors. GeoTrack explores the world to tell stories about extreme weather and natural disasters not covered by the mainstream media. We do a lot of podcasting. We also do a lot of work on the ground. We were in the Tampa St. Pete area last week and chose that area. We knew that the biggest surge wasn't going to happen there. We knew the biggest winds were not going to happen there, but we're very interested in storm impacts and how they impact the most people. We've been concerned about Tampa St. Pete for a long time. As I mentioned before, we were on the ground doing some forecasting and warning people. Unfortunately, I'll be honest, most of the people I interacted with on the ground were very dismissive. They, instead of listening to watches and warnings, I'd say most of the people we interacted with had looked back at their history of not flooding in 40 or 50 years. The next morning, the same people are out in the street in disbelief that they flooded. So that's a common thing that we've had. That's a concern we have. We want to remind people that every storm is a different mixture of wind, rain, and storm surge, and listen to your watches and warnings coming out from the National Hurricane Center. The next storm doesn't care about the previous ones. It's a unique combination, and you have to take them seriously and be prepared. That's really it from GeoTrack. We're going to have some podcasts coming out on Helene coming up in the next couple weeks and months. And that's the update from GeoTrack.
Thank you very much, Hal. Bill, why don't we do the tropical update, and then we can bring Mark Sudduth into the mix.
I'll do that. Let me get over there real quick, and would help if I hit the share button. Come on, Bill, wake up, wake up. Long 900-mile drive the last 2 days. I'm not awake. Here we go. Okay, you should be seeing that 7-day outlook. Is that on there? Oh, good. Okay. All right. This is what we're looking at this morning. It's already out of date. They did update it, but there's actually TD13 now out here. I'll have a quick slide on that in a moment. Hurricane Kirk, I'll talk a little bit about that. And the big orange blob in the Gulf of Mexico. We'll talk at length on that, and I'll probably pick Ryan's brain because he's probably looked at it a lot more than I have this morning. Satellite image from the wide view of the Atlantic. Kirk is a large storm, and as it's gaining latitude now, it's going to get larger. Soon to be Leslie behind it. I would think it's going to have to wait till Kirk gets out of its way because it's getting a high-level flow shearing off the tops a little bit out there. And there's the mishmash going on over in the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, there it is. Our friend Michael Lowry had this in his neat graphic in his blog this morning. These are hurricane formations from October 1st on. And notice that there's nothing anywhere near where Kirk formed. Probably not a big surprise given the much warmer than normal tropical Atlantic and trending towards La Nina type circulation where you have lighter flow in the atmosphere. And we finally got rid of all the dry air that's been killing the storms coming across during the otherwise peak months of August and September. The latest forecast on Kirk, it's forecast to keep moving slowly northwest and then accelerate to the north and northeast over the weekend and early next week. We have it becoming a major hurricane, probably Category 4, and then before finally starting to taper off somewhat. What I like to look at sometimes when I'm reading the tropical cyclone discussion from NHC is this neat graphic put out by CSU on their website. It has all the features that they'll be talking about. And here's where we are now on the intensity forecasts from the various models that the hurricane specialists discuss, as well as the model track forecast. They're all straightforward with a well-defined storm like a Kirk. The shear, they always talk about increasing shear. I find it nice to see some graphical idea of just how bad it's going to be or how good it's going to be, depending on your viewpoint. But light shear as it formed and continues now, and while it intensifies to major with increasing shear as we get into the 5th and 6th of October, which will start detracting from the storm at the same time that it's moving over colder water. So that's it on Kirk. I have no intelligence on what's soon to be Leslie. They just came out with it. I hadn't had a chance to read the discussion yet, but obviously it's moving very slowly to the west now, and it'll go through the same gap into the westerlies coming out of the tropics that Kirk did later this weekend and the next week, and be an ocean storm again. We're going to rack up a whole bunch of ace between Kirk and Leslie to help improve the scores on the seasonal forecast ideas. This is the Gulf of Mexico, Northwest Caribbean loop of our mishmash down there. A lot of convection down in the Bay of Campeche and some scattered convection further to the northeast. Interesting ball of convection has been going on for about a day now. It's mostly associated with pretty good upper divergence over that area, whereas in here we have a trough of low pressure. Yeah, I've got the graph on that. This trough of low pressure that's kind of been hanging around there for many days now and is festering into some activity there. So you kind of watch for development along that trough. There's no surface reflection that I could tell on the convection in the Caribbean, but it is moving in that direction. So we'll wait and see. The models, they're not that excited about it. These are the ensembles from the European, and it's very clear the strong signal on Kirk and the strong signal on Leslie, though there's a lot of spread in the end game on it out about a week or so. And yeah, there's another system coming off Africa in the models that will be contending with our Gulf of Mexico as to who gets Milton and who gets Nadine for a name if the Gulf behaves itself. Same story on the GFS. They're fairly similar. I think I got this hint from you, Ryan, about the overlaying the ensembles on the wind shear product. It's a very, very good way to foresee what some of the challenges might be. And the Gulf is very challenged. You have moderate wind shear in the central Gulf, strong wind shear all across the northern about a week or so from now. So anything that's out there is going to be fighting that in dry air, I think. And so the Florida part of it is the only part that shows effect. And basically the game is it's going to rain like crazy over the Gulf of Mexico and into Florida Peninsula, at least over the next 5 to 7 days from what the models show. And remains to be seen if anything significant circulation-wise develops out of that. It's not the only show in town, and the in the Gulf. Believe it or not, right about in there, in this what otherwise looks like a mishmash off the south coast of Mexico, is soon to be a tropical storm. It's a depression right now off southern Mexico coast, pretty much off the Tehuantepec. And there's the forecast as it is now, becoming a tropical storm, just drifting slowly westward and making landfall. Again, it's been raining. We had Hurricane John, then reincarnation as Tropical Storm John produced tremendous rain in the mountains over the southern Mexican coastal zones in there. I haven't heard much on the news with all that's been going on in our end on that. Rainfall forecast, they still indicating significant rains. This would be in the fairly low terrain, flat terrain of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. But this area here is very mountainous. If it does drift that far west, I think we'll still see significant slides and flash flooding. Last but not least, our buddy Josh Morgerman is probably sitting over here saying, when's this thing going to move again? I've been watching this for now 5 hours now. I don't think it's moved 10 miles in the satellite loop off the southern coast of Taiwan. And the forecast from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center is for it to start moving again and make landfall in Taiwan and very slowly move across there. Very heavy rains if this forecast materializes, given the size of the storm and the slow motion and the mountainous terrain. I looked at the ensembles. I don't have them here. They show a storm stalling, and then the broken umbrella could go anywhere after that. So with that, if you want to add something to that, Ryan, that I missed something on our Gulf of Mexico mishmash?
Well, I mean, no, I think it was a great overview. I mean, simply what I would add here is that there's a lot of structural uncertainty in how exactly this is going to play out. You know, we've got a lot of pieces to this. We've got a tropical wave. We've got a CAG piece. We've got a reverse gap wind event potentially coming from the Eastern Pacific into the Bay of Campeche. So a lot of different sources of vorticity here. And at the same time, we also have very dry air over the northern Gulf of Mexico by the coast, and the potential for several fronts to be in the vicinity, as indicated by the Weather Prediction Center surface maps going out into mid and into the 3 to 7 day time frame. So, you know, I think we have pretty good confidence that some broad area of low pressure is going to develop. I'm trying to communicate to my readership that this may not get a name because it may not structurally meet the definition of a tropical cyclone, but in terms of impacts, we can have more, honestly, we can have more certainty about, more confidence in what the impacts are going to be at this point than whether it'll be, you know, a tropical cyclone. So I'm trying to say, don't fixate on whether or not it gets a name, because if you're in a low-lying area in Central or South Florida, especially, you know, you do need to get ready for what potentially could be a long-lasting rain event, 5 inches or more of accumulations. I'm also getting a lot of people who are very worried about the potential for moisture to be drawn north into the deep south, and I'm trying to provide them some degree of peace of mind, because with that very zonal jet across the deep south, we basically have straight west to east jet early next week. It's unlikely to draw that moisture north into North Georgia and the Carolinas. So if you're listening and getting that information, I know there's a lot of rumors circulating that, you know, another storm is coming and it's going to be another big rain event for the mountains. But I'm not personally seeing that as being the case this time around.
Yeah, I just told someone earlier this morning that I only worry about what's going on in Texas these days consistently, but kind of like you, I focus on where I live. But a prolonged lowish pressure down in the southern Gulf with reinforcing fronts and strengthening high pressure to the north gives a long fetch east gradient, which tends to elevate the tides on the northwest coast of the Gulf of Mexico. And beach erosion and the really vulnerable roads and stuff might see some impacts, but there's nothing I can hang my hat on yet.
Mark,
yeah,
why don't you tell us a little bit about what Helene was like for you?
What Helene was like for me? A week ago, we were starting to set up, and I think about how fleeting it is. It goes by very quick. And now a week later, it's all done. And everything that happened in between, still trying to go through it. The main focus was kind of like Hal talked about, was Tampa Bay area north through the Big Bend. We put some stuff in Cedar Key, lots of stuff. We know I mean, Alex, you remember the fire chief came and spoke to us at South Padre back in April, and Robert Robinson. And I remember just the look on his face, like, again, and this one looked really, really serious. Idalia did too, but this was worse and focused on St. Mark's as well. I was thinking about Ryan and Weather Tiger up there in Tallahassee. I was like, man, if this happens, Tallahassee is just going to be wrecked. And I've been through Tallahassee, stayed in Tallahassee for many a hurricane over the years. And I know St. Mark's well, and I thought, gosh, this surge up here, because you remember the hurricane forecast track from the Hurricane Center was west of St. Mark's for quite a while. And I thought, if that core drives the surge into St. Mark's, this would just be history making. And so there's a lot of challenges, because you don't just drive up and down the Big Bend in a straight line. It's very much like Texas, Bill, that you don't go in a straight line. You have to go down to areas. You got to work around these bays and whatever in Texas. And the Big Bend of Florida is similar. And it's similar to Louisiana. You don't just drive along the coast until you get west. Hal and I talked about that, that each of these areas has their challenges. So I focused on the Tampa Bay area to document that surge and just to show that they're well outside the code at one point, but there's going to be surge there. And our camera, especially on Bayshore in Tampa, really produced. The camera was about 6.5, 7 feet up, and the bottom of the camera, waves were going by, and they were going into these got to be $1 million houses there along Bayshore. They had flooding, and then of course Cedar Key was heavily impacted. We had, I think, 4 cameras there, and including some new stuff that we've tested out that's just remarkable. That's going to really help us in the future. And then St. Mark's. Crystal River as well. Crystal River. Surprisingly, Crystal River, the surge came in much later. Everything's just, the timing and everything's always weird down there. But I remember in St. Mark's going down, it reminded me a lot of Michael, setting stuff up very early in the morning on Thursday morning. It just takes a long time to do this because it's such a huge area. And Marcel, you guys know Marcel, he helped me. And we were setting stuff up, and it was about 6 in the morning. Someone's getting ready to come up Thursday morning. And there's people out there kind of hanging around and talking, and they weren't real confident in the forecast themselves. And, oh, it never hits us. They always say it. And I heard the same thing from people in Mexico Beach when we were setting up the cameras there in front of this building, that in our Michael video from the GoPro, you can, and in this case it was wind, you can hear the building shredding. You just hear it coming apart behind the camera. And then of course the storm surge came in after that. And it just gave me such an eerie, I was like, where have I seen this play before? That people just, like Hal talked about, they're basing it on the past, not what this could do. And that was, I was like, well, I'm hoping you're going to leave, because 15 to 20 feet if it happens. And they were very dismissive. That'll be all right. All right.
Mark, was this in St. Mark's, or where was these
St.
conversations?
St. Mark's. Yep. They were hanging out in upstairs, second floor. And Marcel, he's tall, and we had a big ladder, and the camera was probably 12 feet above the ground. And so the guy up on his balcony was just a few feet higher. And we were just talking to him. And people are nice and pleasant, but they just completely dismissed it. And unfortunately, they were right for the future. You know what I mean? Good.
That's right,
them.
Mark.
Like, oh, like,
yeah, with Debbie, Adelia, and Helene all hitting over east of them, it reinforces it, right?
It does. It reinforces it. So, and then everything was just, Steenhatchee. I forgot Steenhatchee. There's so much to remember. And Steenhatchee, I really wanted to get right, because for Idalia, we had our camera system and the weather station on the bridge, and you could just happen to see the Steinhatchee River in the right-hand side of the shot, and the surge came up the Steinhatchee and wiped out all that stuff in the shot, and we caught all that, and it was remarkable. I showed that at the Ntwc this past April. And so this time I said, all right, we're going to put a camera down next to the river. And so that's exactly what I did on this like gazebo pier thing that they had built. And I mean, the camera was just right there, looking straight across. You can see the bridge on the right across the Steinhatchee. And of course, this came in at night, which just absolutely stinks for so many reasons. But our night vision on the cameras worked, and you can see the surge come up, and the water was coming by so fast. I cannot even fathom. Like, it looked like some of the terrifying footage coming out of the Appalachians from flash flooding, but this was surge. And, you know, again, in Adalia, we're seeing it from afar. This was point blank, and stuff's just going by, and it looks like time lapse, but it's not. It's real time. And then this huge piece of floating dock just comes right up and lands on this gazebo right in front of the camera. And it lifted it up above the camera because the surge had come on up. And then it finally settled on the roof of the gazebo, and the under part of it was bobbing in the water for hours. And there was speculation from people, did a whale just wash up? Because you can see all the barnacles, and it was just weird. I got in the eye somewhere near Madison at a wide open area of I-10. And the one thing, though, and I've mentioned this a lot on my live stream, we saw a lot of semis on I-10 driving into that eye wall. And I was literally having anxiety attacks, like, these truckers could die. This is terrible. And realizing, you know, after talking to some people, that there's more to it than just how do they know. There's actually could be some cultural differences that some people just don't know. And so there's got to be a lot more work done with our infrastructure commerce crowd. And I was talking about it on Weather Brains, in fact, the other day, and that, you know, hey, I'll volunteer to go speak to the National Trucker Conference if they have such a thing, and just say, look, you guys have got to pay attention. You just pull over. Like Ryan said, there's just a certain area you got to avoid. And that bothered me because we've seen
Mark,
killed.
they have competing interests. That's part of the problem. I talked to a group of them once about that same issue. On the one hand, they're under a lot of pressure to meet deadlines.
Yeah.
Got to get there. On the other hand,
I get it, but we want them there alive. You know,
hurricane
about
coming
these
this
people.
way. And it's not a good position to be in. They need to have reinforcement from who's managing this stuff, that it's okay to stop and wait for the storm to go by.
Agreed. It was hard to see that, and you know, they were going slow, but nevertheless, you're driving into the eye wall of a hurricane. It was not good. And then, of course, what happened in Western North Carolina. That's where I was born, in Durham. I'm a North Carolina native. My parents lived in Spruce Pine for 30 years, and just the helpless feeling of what we have seen coming out and still coming out, and, you know, the devastation up there, and realizing, you know, we all did everything we could possibly do, and this one beat us. That there was just not much. I mean, you had the pre-rain event, you know, the antecedent stuff, the ridiculous amounts of rain coming down off those ridge lines, these communities. It's the perfect storm in that regard. I don't see how there could have been, you know, what was the governor of North Carolina going to do? Tell everybody west of I-77 to evacuate? Probably not practical. We got beat on this one as a society, as the human race, whatever. I don't know what else could have been done. You know, Asheville, do you tell everybody to leave? You couldn't because of all that rain. We got beat.
And you put them on roads that are down in the low spots, and you kill them on the road. We've been arguing about evacuation of freshwater flooding for a long time, and it's usually the challenge is that the lead time you need to get that many people out of the way. You're not going to know which basins are going to flood, and when they're all flooding like that, where are you going to put all those people, and how are you going to get them out of there? I don't think you can.
Right. And so that hurts. It does. It's because it's my home state as well. Like I said, my parents lived up there. But overall, going back and looking through the data from the video, because while it's happening, it's information and it serves a curiosity. But then when it's done, and even while it's happening, but certainly when it's done, we start extracting data from it. How fast did the surge come up? How high did it get? All those kinds of things. And that'll really be helpful in the future. I'll certainly be working with the storm surge unit at NHC on that, of course, and we'll learn more than we ever have. And we tried some new stuff that we're looking forward to using more in the future. But also, we put these weather stations up. You remember somebody heisted one during Francine, but we have plenty of them. And again, the elusive wind. I know that Josh Morgerman goes after it in person because that's his goal. So I need to just have like a helmet anemometer on him, get an Arm Young on him with a helmet, and he can be, I'm joking, of course. The cameras do really well, and I'm very proud of that. But, and Ryan will tell you, and Hal knows this too, all of you do, wind data is so difficult to collect. And before I quit this job, whenever that is, I'm going to get it, where we get it right in the right spot. Everything worked the whole time. And we did pretty well with this. I had a weather station in St. Mark's, but the worst of the core missed. But another weather station in Cedar Key. And the way ours work is we clamp them down onto bridges, so we don't have to worry about driving around with 10-meter wind towers. I hate to want to sound arrogant, but I think it's genius because got a nice open area. You can clamp those things down now that we've figured out how to keep the thieves from stealing them and whatnot. And it's like, oh my goodness, how this is so hard. And pressure, much easier because we can literally drop these drop sensors all around, and we collect great pressure data. A lot of storm chasers do. But the wind, I want the wind data. That's my next, I want that to be part of my legacy.
Mark, when we were texting, you told me the cameras did amazingly well, even in fast flowing water. Did you secure them in a different way this time? Or,
Yes.
What seemed like they did? What did you change?
We used, I have to be careful. It's kind of tradecraft stuff.
Oh, sure. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Because it is competitive now, which again, part of me embraces that because I think that the more the better. I'm definitely, it's for the greater good. So, but we did change up how we secure them, and it's as near perfect as you can get. These things are clamped down so that yes, fast moving water stuff can hit them, you name it, they're not coming loose. You're going to have to knock off what we attached it to. And in fact, one of the cameras went underwater at Cedar Key on the Tiki Bar. The low key hideaway there was the exterior shot, and the night vision worked great because you could see the surge come up, you can see it go back down in time lapse, and it actually was under about a foot of water for 30 minutes or so, and somehow still streamed live through the water. I got to start looking into that. Like, okay, what is the threshold before a radio signal? And I will tell you, we're using Verizon, and they are not a sponsor. I've paid my bills like everybody else, and I credit that to Verizon in terms of having the towers up that were working just fine. But yeah, they streamed underwater a couple of these cameras and held on, tight and didn't move. And in fact, one of them that we put that was looking at the University of Florida Hurricane Sentinel that they put up, Dr. Forrest Masters and many other colleagues of his, including my friend and colleague, Dr. Ryan Meares, they anchored that thing 20 feet into the ground in Cedar Key, right at the beach. And it's this first time they'd ever done it. And boy, Alex, I hope we can get somebody to come talk about that at next year's conference because, wow. And it only got, I think, maybe 84, by the way. I'm not 100% sure, but it wasn't near the core. Whatever, we understand that. But we had a camera that was looking at it, and the camera was actually mounted on a basketball goal, the steel curved bar of a basketball goal. The goal tilted several degrees from the surge and the wind, but the camera held on, and that camera went underwater as well. So a lot of new techniques, a lot of improvements. Every single camera system was running the next day We have a dashboard that looks just like, the Zoom meeting here with all the cameras on it. And every one of them was up and running the next day. That part, half Verizon, because their network held, the other half, our engineering, and 20 years of finally getting it so these darn things won't fill up with water, they won't come loose. We finally got it. I just wish I had two of me that I could have put as many units up in the North Carolina mountains. That'll haunt me for a long time.
Mark,
But
can I
you
ask
only
you
do so
one
much.
last question? With your knowledge of Western North Carolina, I was surprised to see widespread cell phone outages. This
Yeah.
surprised me. I picture cell phone towers up high on mountaintops, and I know the winds had died down quite a bit. I mean, how do you explain that? Or did it relate to riverine flooding or just landslides? I mean, what was going on?
So I think part of it, from my experience working with some of these companies, Sprint and Verizon over the years, learning how their back end works, the towers can be okay, but if you wipe out the central office or the back end, it's no good. You cut T1 lines and microwave transmissions or whatever, your towers, can hold, but if the back end isn't there, it's pointless.
If your back end's down next to a river and that whole
Yeah.
part of the town gets wiped out, doesn't matter if your cell phone towers are still in operation, right?
Exactly how. Yeah. So, a successful event, but we all know you carry it, you feel it. And these people experienced a generational historic event, and we all saw it coming. But, what can you do? You want to save everybody, but we can't. So we just keep moving forward and do what we do. And next time, try to do better.
Yeah, one idea I toy with is to figure out how it could be done is since a lot of these villages are down in the valleys, build a shelter on a safe spot on the hillside somewhere.
Agreed.
If they hit too quickly, they may lose everything, but they won't lose their lives if we can
Right.
do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, what an event. And then to see that all the different people that are trying to help, that's the good side of it. But, at the end of the day, man, it's like you get worked up for these events because we're going to put our talent to use. And then when it's over, it's like, God, like we don't wish for it. Obviously, we have no control over it, despite what you hear on the internet. Story for another day. And a completely different podcast too, right? It's hard. And that's why we do these conferences. That's why we go out in the field. That's why Hal does the work that he does. That's why Ryan sends the newsletters out. We try to find as many people as we can that will listen, and then we hope that it'll spread from there. And we just keep doing the best we can.
Exactly. I've got one question coming in from Casper Gregory for Ryan. And it says, please have Ryan discuss a little about his in-house ACE model and how it has responded to the recent uptick in activity over the Atlantic Basin. That's a good one, Ryan.
Agreed.
Sure. So yeah, that's one unique thing we
Oops.
Seasonal forecast model that updates each day through the hurricane season. Everybody has access to the ACE models. I also run for clients US ACE model, so just ACE occurring over the continental United States. Along with everybody else, we were in the same boat, forecasting 200 plus ACE in our March and May and all through the summer, and our obviously our written products and then our daily updates were very much doing that. As August, mid-August, we hit mid-August and early September, when you should be, the model basically was saying we should be doing 4 ACE units per day. So we declined very steeply. And then in about mid to late September, started to stabilize at around 130 ACE being the projection going forward. And now that we're adding back in the expectation of Kirk's ACE, the model actually adds in the NHC forecast ACE over the next 5 days. So that kind of accounts for that jump up to around 140, 145 that we've seen over the last couple of days in the ACE model. And Leslie is not, or PD13 to be Leslie is not in there yet. But once I'll rerun it after I get off this call and post that update today, it'll probably be up around 150. So the expectation is that the model will be keying in on the idea that there's a couple very delayed long track Cape Verde style systems that are coming. July and October were our Cape Verde season this year. And, that's going to boost us probably back up into that top tercile of ACE since 1950. That threshold's about 130 to 135. We're likely to get over that. And I think very outside chance that we get to that hyperactive or the top 1/6 threshold. It's 160 to 165. Do want to make the key point, though, that the U.S. ACE forecast really didn't budge. It was calling for an above average season consistently, and we didn't see that similar decline through August and September because so much of the activity has been focused near the continental United States. Some of the early indications were that those steering patterns would suggest that. So going forward from here, I guess the takeaway is that still running that US ACE model, and it's got about a 60% chance of one more US hurricane landfall somewhere in the continental United States from here on out through the season. So hoping that model is wrong, but we've already had 4. That's a lot, but there is certainly potential for one more round here as we go into that late season.
All right. Well, we're pushing the 11 o'clock limit here. So let's see if we can go to round robin with you guys and get your perspective on today's show and what we've got coming up. Bill, let's start with you.
Well, my takeaway is kind of what I thought about when you put the show together. Is it's so great that there are so many individuals able to work in this space now of real-time aspects of hurricanes and share our information. I think a lot is learned from that doesn't really show up as documentation, but I know I learned a lot from it. So thank you both, Mark and Ryan, for spending an hour of your day with us.
Ryan?
Love it.
Well, as I'm digging out, not physically, but at least mentally here in the wake of Helene, this is such a complex event. There's so much to unpack. And I think the kind of conversations that we're having today and thinking about as forecasters and science communicators and risk communicators, it's something it's a conversation that we need to keep going because we need to learn from this event. This is not the last 4-quadrant threat of all the hurricane threats and impacts that we're going to be facing. The risk will continue and we need to improve.
Hal, before you get into your takeaways, you're going to have to explain about your hat.
Yeah, a different hat today, like to mix it up a little bit. This is a special hat that Waffle House actually gave me in the Western Florida Panhandle for doing some forecasting for them. So usually I have the Australian hat today, it mixed up. But my takeaway really is that we need to focus on growth and improvement and not perfection. And Mark, I'm just amazed. I mean, through the years, you've faced dangers of flowing waters, of thieves. I mean, all these different things, of the vibrations on the bridge, and you just don't give up. You keep coming back, you improve the product. And I think that's a real inspiration for all of us. Field work is challenging. There's a reason why not that many people do it. And it just reminds me that, the goal is not perfection. It's just to improve what we've done. And next year is going to be better than this year. So hats off to both you guys for, communicating so much with folks and for getting out there. And again, our goal should be improvement. We'll never hit perfection, but always encouraged to see what both you guys are doing. And Mark, thanks for your perspectives on the field work.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I like Ryan's writing style, by the way. I've commented on that a few times in my video discussions. The talent that he puts into there, I don't know where you get that from, but writing like he does takes skill, and I think it's effective. So compliments there to Ryan for how you communicate, what you communicate. I really enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Mark. I've been following your work for a long time. I mean, since I was coming up in the field. So it's great to see you getting those observations, because observations are so critical. We can stare at models all we want, but
Right.
Observations really matter.
Perseverance, got to keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. You guys joining us today. And, of course, Bill and Hal adding your excellent perspective out there. Thank you so much, everybody. We want to remind you that these programs are brought to you by USAA, South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, the Weather Company, Weather Boy, and Weather Call. Join us next week.